Well, welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to the Six Screens Telenetwork here on Sunday. Well, on Sunday, we get into some different ways of thinking. We get more theological, you could say. We get into scripture. We talk about spirituality and what people do for spirituality when they leave the watchtower. And that is the name of our program today. What do people do? What do ex-Jehovah's Witnesses do for spirituality when they leave the watchtower? Well, we have a woman, you know her. She's on our Six Screens network. She's your favorite apostate. She's Apostababe, and she's Linda James. And we're going to have Anne Marie come in and do an interview with Linda. And Linda's going to tell us all about her trek in the watchtower and what she's done for spirituality when she left. So Anne Marie, I'm going to bring Apostababe on, Linda James, and there she is. Anne Marie, I'll step in the background. It's all yours.
Well, Brother Rick, want to welcome everyone into Six Screens Sunday. Today is July 17th. July 16th. My husband reminded me. And the year is 2023. Can you believe it? Those of us who are old timers are probably still shaking our heads. We have very much probably everybody's favorite lady on the Six Screens. We like to call her everyone's favorite apostate. Hi, Linda James, Apostababe. How are you? Thank you so much for coming on this day.
Hey, Anne Marie. It's good to be here. It really is. Thank you for having me on this morning.
Well, I'm excited. I didn't even know it was you. Rick kept saying Linda, and I'm like, what?
Who's a Linda?
And I realized it was you, because I haven't called you in forever because I don't have your number. But I love listening to you. You're so great. And I told Rick, if anything happens to me, Linda's the only one that can do the tentacle show. The only one. I'm like, but then she'd have to be up for 24/7. I wouldn't be
right.
I can't wait to hear your story. Anything that comes out of your mouth, I'm listening. I'm all ears.
Wow. That's really cool to hear. Thank you. Yeah, I enjoy you listening to your show too. It's really interesting to listen to people's journey and what they do after they leave the watchtower or before they leave the watchtower, what brought them there, what brought them out of there. All of that is so fascinating to me. I really enjoy your show as well.
So would you like to share your story, or, I mean, are you like a sequential speaker, or do you like to have questions asked? But I like to just listen to a person just talk. So what feels comfortable for you, Miss Linda? Because you're like a powerful, wonderful influence on Six Screens. I don't know if you're aware of it, but I listen to you a lot. Like I have a playlist of Six Screens. And every time you come on, I'm always like, damn, she can put it together like nobody else. The way you describe things, I always want to write it down, but I don't take shorthand. And you're just very good at, I wouldn't say simplification, but you put serious things in a way that anybody with two brain cells can understand. And it's profound. I'm like, I've never heard it quite said that way. And you just have that gift, you do. And sometimes I think, wow, if Linda was on during a daytime, you'd probably be the most number one, 5,000 views in a week. Everybody loves you. Are you there, my darling? Linda, did we lose you, honey? Rick, did we lose our Linda? Maybe it's my phone. Please tell me I didn't. Oh, God damn it. Hello, is anyone there?
Well, we're here. We're working on it. Just hang in here with us. We'll get her back.
It's
okay.
I'm sure my phone hadn't dropped the phone.
No, she's back now.
Hey, Linda.
I don't know why she can't hear me. Can you hear me, Rick?
We can hear you now, Linda. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay, it did a circle thing like it was thinking or rebooting or something. Sorry about that, Anne Marie.
No worries. I was afraid my phone, I almost hung up because I thought my phone had dropped the call. I'm like, oh no. But anyway,
Me too. Okay.
I'm not
Sure.
the only one who appreciates and admires you, so I'm listening to you, my dear.
Okay, I'll go ahead and get started. So I was born in, my mother got baptized while pregnant with me, and she ended up hearing about the organization through a friend of hers at a job she had. So she just heard about the organization and thought to herself, "Oh, I'd like that." Today, with my hindsight, and as much as I know about her childhood now, today I understand how her upbringing actually groomed her for this organization because of the dysfunction, and her parents were divorced and stuff like that. So when she saw the articles of lovely, families together and, wholesomeness and everything like that, I can totally see why she took a look at that and thought to herself, that's what I want. So I think I'm going to be telling this story like in this manner. In hindsight, I can look back at things and see why, but at the time I didn't know what the hell was going on. So she ended up getting baptized, and she said she was pregnant with me when she got baptized. So I was non-baptized. I never ended up getting baptized. I did, and it wasn't for a lack of not trying, because I did. I would say the first time I studied was around 16 or 17, and then again maybe at 23. Now, growing up, I was in special ed classes because I have a learning disability, which is okay. I just learn differently. And I know for myself, when I learn things, it takes a bit longer, and that's okay. But when I've got it, I've really got it. So I had special ed teachers and such as that. And what happens in special ed classes, at least for me at that time, is you go to one level, and what you get is extra time to finish that level, and then you move on to the next. And you get time to finish that level, and you move on to the next. And the classroom is smaller so that you can approach the teacher and say, I'm having trouble with this. And I had really good special ed teachers as I was growing up. None of them really none of them told me how to do it. They showed me how to do it, and then they would ask me questions to help me you know what I'm saying? They didn't do it for me. They basically stood next to me and gave me options and asked me questions so that I would think more broadly. I now, in my hindsight today, tend to think that those were the ones that taught me how to critically think, because asking questions were never a problem in those classes. I'm stumped at this. I don't know how that works with this. Always welcome. These kinds of questions were always welcome in my special ed classes. So there's that. So when it came to studying the Bible to become a baptized member, I would come across a certain level, and the Bible study conductor would want to just push me to go further. And I wasn't okay with that, because in my head, you don't go to the next level till you understand this one, if that makes sense, right? So it just felt very wrong. And sometimes I would just take the directions and then go, okay, that's what they're directing me to do. So they would take me ahead further, even though I might not have understood a certain doctrine. But then I would reach a point and say, look, okay, now this doesn't work with this, and neither does that work with this. What do I do with this? It's not making sense. And I would always come up with a way my head was thinking and why it didn't make sense. So I wasn't just somebody that nodded my head and said yes at every answer and answered every paragraph with the answer that's in the paragraph. I really, really needed it to make sense. I mean, I was making a dedication to Jehovah, and I was serious about it. This was a serious commitment to me. And what I'm supposed to do with it is understand these doctrines, and not only understand them, but agree to them. You know, that was what I was supposed to do, along with my own commitment that's in my heart. So sometimes I would be met with half explanations that didn't make sense, or sometimes I'd be mocked, which really
Are you kidding me? Are you seriously kidding me?
you know, I would say something as it was I now see it as intimidation and manipulation, but at that time I just remember looking at them repeat something I said back and then begin to laugh at it, and that just closed me down mentally in my head. So both times, you know, of going through these attempts of getting baptized, they had to drop me at the 6-month point, which I didn't know that was a thing till later. Until later, I found out after 6 months, you drop them and move on to somebody else who's more, what is that called?
Are you there, Linda?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm here.
Linda, when they first came up with only study with a potential convert for 6 months, and if they haven't basically, quote unquote, progressed to baptism, drop them, that came out in 68 with the Truth That Leads to Everlasting Life book, because time is so short. Everything they need to know about, quote unquote, the truth is in this book, and we don't have time to waste on people that don't get it, and everything they need to know within 6 months is in this book. So if they haven't gotten it, then drop them. In other words, you said you were dropped. That's like saying, well, you're not worth wasting any time on, you know, like you're going to die. Oh, well, gee, next. Oh,
And that time I didn't see it as you're going to die. I mean, I never put the two things together, that you have to be a baptized member to survive Armageddon. I don't recall those two things meeting up in my brain, you know, yet. Because I remember hearing them say at the platform, you know, some people will be there that they're going to need to be taught the gospel. Well, I didn't realize it was going to be resurrected people that were going to be taught the gospel. Anyways, you know, I ended up, and my mother didn't push me. You know, she didn't push me to get baptized. I watched my sister get baptized. She's 2 years younger than me. And what I have come to realize is my mother is a very loving person. And then on the other side, she's also very controlling with me. And she really never could get a good enough grasp of controlling me, of my every thought. And I've come to realize later on in life, like within, I would say, the last 10 years, the narcissistic characteristics that she has. And we are all narcissistic. You know, it's like a scale. There's a scale of narcissism. Some of us are lower on it. Some of us are higher on it. You know, and I would pretty much classify her medium and on the way to high, you know. So, you know, it didn't dawn on me until I would say about 2 years ago that, gosh, the reason she probably didn't push it is because she knows she would not have been able to communicate with me. And how could she have control over me if she can't talk to me? So that's my own conclusion over the last few years. That could be true, that could not be true. But she did not push me, which I was very thankful about. So this was like 79, 80, 1979 or 80. I ended up getting a boyfriend from high school. And you know the deal. You can't date anybody unless they're a Jehovah's Witness. So he met my parents. This is the deal. They, you know, the congregation started recruiting him. He brought his mother and his sister. and everything was going just fine. And 1980, one of my dear friends from school named Charles Miranda was murdered by William Bonin, which was the freeway killer in Los Angeles. And I'll say that again. My dear friend Charles Miranda was murdered by William Bonin. Anybody can Google this. And this was in 1980. Okay. So he ended up going to some club in Hollywood with a couple of people, my friend Charles, and he didn't make it back. And I didn't know why. You know, this was a friend I could pretty much only have at school and maybe talk to on the phone when I was at home. And, you know, weeks go by. I see the two girls that he went with to the Hollywood place. I see them at school every day, but I don't see him. And eventually my mother tells me that they found Charles, and he was unidentifiable except through his teeth, through the dentist being able to, you know, identify him through his teeth. So I remember going to his funeral, but not being able to go into the church for the
I'm so sorry, Linda. That's terrible.
go into the church. It was very frustrating. They go into the church and get to go to his funeral, but then there was a graveside. And we did get to go to that. So I did get to see that. And I remember I watched his father throw himself onto the coffin and just start bawling and apologizing to him. And I realized at that point, it was more than me that was hurting. I mean, you know, I was still only thinking of myself at the time. I wasn't even thinking about his own biological family. I was just thinking about how things were affecting me. I couldn't think further than that, you know, that my friend is gone. I was trying to make sense of it. And when I saw his father throw himself on the coffin, it was just so devastating. And I can't even imagine that kind of pain that his father must have been going through, the anguish. And he was raised by his father and would visit his mother. And he had the best hair ever because his mother was a hairdresser. And I had not gone to beauty school yet. And I remember thinking, oh, I'm going to learn how to cut hair just like that. And he wore it feathered, you know, on both sides. And that was a thing back in the 80s, right? So,
Right.
so some time went by, and this boyfriend of mine, you know, I told him, yeah, I think I'm ready to give you my virginity, you know. He's like, are you sure? I don't know. Well, no. I talked him into it. It all went down very, very well. And by the way, I didn't lose my virginity. I remember right where I left it, okay? I remember the date and everything. So that happened. I was 16. By the way, Charles was 15 when he was murdered, and it was on February 3rd, from things I've read since, February 3rd, 1980, murdered by William Bonin. And I've also read up on William Bonin. He went through hell. I'm not excusing it. I'm just saying I get it. So back to the place of, you know, of becoming sexually active with this boyfriend of mine. And then I also was willing to try some marijuana with some other friends. And at that time, when I tried the marijuana, I went into this horrible paranoid trip. It was horrible. And so from that point, I kept having, if you heard of rolling earthquakes, I'm having these rolling panic attacks. It's really not funny, but it was torturous. And so I couldn't get out of bed for 2 weeks. I lost like 20 pounds. So, you know, my parents, of course, were concerned. Then my dad gets a phone call because my dad was very furious with these friends of mine that I smoked pot with, because now I'm, you know, I would call it a mini breakdown. But some of my friend's sister called and said, you know, your daughter might be having panic attacks because she had sex. And then my dad gets off the phone and asked me if that happened, and I admitted to it. So the organization broke us up and made it to where me and my boyfriend could not see each other anymore. Well, I wasn't having any of that. And my mother would ask me, you know, do you think you could not see him anymore? I thought to myself, no, I do want to keep seeing him. What I didn't realize then, and in hindsight, what I realize now is the elders were asking her to ask me questions and then report back to them. So I thought I was having a conversation with my mother, but in actuality, she was asking questions for the elders. And I got put on public reproof because of me not being willing to break up with him. And that was the orders given to me. But when my mother asked me if I thought I would be able to not see him again, I'm like, no, here I was 16, stupid, in love with this guy. Why would I want to stop seeing him, you know? But they eventually made it to where, you know, he would never see me again or refuse to see me. So they took me to a therapist, and he was a Jehovah's Witness therapist. I knew he was a Jehovah's Witness therapist, but anyways, I had snuck out of my home and went to try to see my boyfriend, you know, and those were nice visits and everything. And I'm seeing a therapist and I'm thinking to myself, oh, finally, you know, somebody I can talk to. And so I tell him that, right? Not knowing about the bedroom rules.
Oh,
And
no.
only told him it went so far, you know, only that far, right? You know, this is back in the time when Clinton was going, I did not have.
Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh,
I'm here.
it seems sometimes to go in and out. So did you know that this therapist that you thought, wow, finally someone I can talk to, did you know that he was a Jehovah's Witness?
Yes. Yes. So I thought I thought that there would be confidentiality. But after telling him that I went and visited my boyfriend, he said to me, well, I'm an elder and I'm going to have to report you to headquarters. I about just passed out. I could have passed out. Nobody told me he was an elder at all. No one did. I thought I was seeing a therapist, and I've checked it out. It was before HIPAA rules or anything. And this was in Southern California. So because of that, I got put on public reproof. And that lasted about 6 months. But in that time frame, I knew that if Armageddon came, I would not survive. And the elders told me that when I pray, Jehovah God would not hear my prayers. Today, with hindsight, I think to myself, how dare them? You know, looking back at that time and the vulnerable age that I was so sheltered. And I truly believe these elders were put there by Holy Spirit and were speaking for Jehovah. Today, again, how dare them tell me that Jehovah God could not hear my prayers? Okay. So I was, 10th grade at that time. When I got into the 12th grade, so in about 6 months, Jehovah finally forgave me and I got reinstated. Isn't that amazing? It takes Jehovah, I don't know how long, depends on who you are. and people get reinstated. But, this was back in the days when they would announce your name at the platform, and they said my name.
Oh,
You know,
went through. How humiliating.
it was very humiliating. Today I realized that that's a cultic tactic that's considered public shaming,
Mhm.
and many cults use different forms of public shaming. So in my senior year, I ended up getting a boyfriend, and I wasn't going to break up with this one. Wasn't going to break up with this one at all. I ended up, saying to myself, yeah, I know how this story goes. They're going to tell me to break up, and I'm not going to do it. So I ended up going to prom even with him and snuck it.
That such a shame you have to sneak to go to prom. Ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. So, it was I had a job that, I got off at midnight. So I ended up preparing the whole thing to where I would be home at the normal time. So that was fun. So after I graduated, he, it was his 12th grade year as well. And then my mother found out that we were together about 6 months after high school. And of course I got told again, demanded to break up with him, and I refused to. So I was kicked out of the house and my parents' home. So where did I go? Moved into his house and under his parents' roof. And that turned out to be a pretty good thing because his mother was very good to me. And I consider her as someone that helped to raise me. She gave me my first birthday cake. I had my first Christmas with them. And they were dirt poor,
Oh.
I had already started beauty school through the ROP program, which meant I needed to come up with $8 a week to give to the school, and then bus money every day to get there and back. And she managed to come up with that money every single week. And I remember her handing it to me in these dollar bills we crumbled up and change and everything. She managed to scoop and find it anywhere and made sure I got to go on the bus every day and go back home every day and give that $8 every week. I remember one day she sat on the couch with a bowl of popcorn and a needle and thread and just started threading the popcorn. And they had like this Charlie Brown tree, Christmas tree, which if you don't know what that is, it's a Christmas tree that's got very little branches. So it's kind of a sparse Christmas tree is what they had. Kind of this Charlie Brown Christmas tree with hardly any branches. And so, I had never done anything in preparing Christmas. So she gave me a needle and thread, and I started threading the popcorn, and that ended up being tinsel on the tree. That was my first Christmas, and it turned out, really well. It was a really nice experience. And as time went by, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just picturing this wonderful woman that the Lord brought into your life, that the universe brought into your life, a home where you are treated with love and kindness and care. And I'm just picturing you sitting on the couch with this lady learning to needle and thread popcorn, which is an old tradition.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so happy for you that you got shown that, Linda.
Yeah, I mean, I look back at it now and I can just see what love, she had for me, and how she knew how naive I was, because I was pretty green, and, I grew up under a rock and didn't really know how life works, but she was supporting what I had already started in beauty school and everything. I ended up marrying her son and having one child, and that's my oldest daughter. And then some time went by, and I found out that he was using drugs. So I did not know how to, at the time, remain with somebody using drugs. I just got scared and left him. So there's that. And then later on, else I knew from high school. Now, I don't know if it was in that in-between time or if it was just after I got married again. There was this crazy Pentecostal lady that pretty much scared the crap out of me because, one of my friends who used to be a witness as well, but was kind of inactive, told me that God talks to her. And I'm like, what? That just seems scary to me with the way we've been indoctrinated, right? But one day we were over at this person's mother's home. I'm at the kitchen table, and she walks over to me and puts down a stack of cassette tapes. I didn't know what they were, but I knew that she was giving them to me, and she walked away.
Okay.
Tapes of Dr. Walter Martin. So if anybody doesn't know who Dr. Walter Martin is, he is a apologetic. He's part of the apologetics. So that would be considered standing up for the faith, for the Christian faith. He used to have a radio show called The Bible Answer Man. I talked to him once on that show, and that was pretty cool. But all of these tapes, I went through them, and it was like giving scenarios of pretty much everything we've been indoctrinated with, and then with counter arguments of how the true gospel is. And to me,
wow,
it was like finding out I was adopted, right? So now I'm in this journey of looking for my authentic spiritual father, because I've been raised by a counterfeit spiritual father in the Watchtower, is how I was looking at it. So, I spent 3 years. I was like, I'm going to prove this guy wrong. Can you imagine? I'm like, oh no, this dude's all wrong. And that kind of arrogance we had in the Watchtower, we know better than everybody else, right? Even though I wasn't an active member, if I was ever going to get right, back right with God, I would be coming back to the organization. So that was my mindset. So that's called physically out, mentally in. And that's where I was at. So every single scenario out of those 4 or 5 tapes, I went through and found the information he talked about, the Watchtowers and Awakes, or different books and quotes he talked about, and looked at them up, each and every single one. And I'm like, wow, he's got a point here. And oh my goodness, he's right on this one, 3 years of that. I had the interlinear, Hebrew, I was seriously looking into this stuff. And after that, I was getting an understanding of what the mainstream, Christianity is, and how it's different from the Watchtower, Jehovah's doctrinal differences.
So could I ask, when did you stop going to meetings? Was it after your mom kicked you out of the house and you started living with your boyfriend and his family?
Yes, it was actually my dad that kicked me out of the house. My mother kept begging me to come back. Now, today, with hindsight, I have come to find that elders actually go to parents and tell them to, if you're over 18 and you're not in a spiritually, good position, to kick your kids out. I now know that happens. So I'm pretty sure my father was directed by the elders to kick me out. My mother continually begged me to come back home. And to be honest, I was scared of her. I I was beat by her all my life. And when my parents would fight, I never saw my father hit my mother, but I always saw my mother hit my father. And my father only held his hands up to block her, but I never saw him beating on her. So, and she would have these outrageous times of just raging on me. That was my whole childhood with my mother. And with my hindsight, looking back, understanding that the organization makes it the parents' responsibility to make sure your kids become baptized members, you know. But I just, as much as I was a believer, when it came down to all these doctrines and how the organization presents it, it really didn't make sense. So anyways, and I wasn't going to go back home because I was scared of my mother. I liked not getting beat on. Okay. I just did. Okay. So sometime in my second marriage, by this time I had had another child. So I had 2 girls by this time. I believe I found out about Randall Waters from Hermosa Beach, Free Minds, and he ended up getting me in touch with Cynthia Hampton. So, and this is before, you know, the internet or anything. And he had a newsletter that he would send out once a month or quarterly. I forget which one. And it was nice to read his newsletter. And what I found very comforting, and this might sound strange, but I think a lot of your audience will get it. I found it very comforting to read it. The font that he used on his newsletter was the same font that was in the Watchtower and Awake. Same font. So it was actually a comforting thing to read. So I was getting to know Cynthia Hampton, and she basically was she was my first apostate that I ever met. And she was not like, you know, the organization says apostates are. At all. At all. She was a nice woman, you know, and she was a bit older than me, so I saw her as, you know, a bit wiser than me, and she's kind of she's on the smarter side, and she's academically academic things come very natural to her. But she had a really she was very patient with me as I was learning things. I mean, I'd ask her the same question, I don't know, 1,500 times, and each time she never got irritated. She'd still just answer it. So she was very, very good to me. And I remember her telling me too, when she was explaining her story, that her husband, Jehovah's Witness husband, used to beat on her. And but they didn't disfellowship him for that. They just told her to go home and be a better wife. They ended up disfellowshipping him for that. Now, that wasn't alarming to me at all. You know, I thought to myself, that sounds about right, you know, how things work in the org. Now, Cynthia Hampton was on the Leah Remini show, the one that Leah Remini had for the Jehovah's Witnesses. She was sitting next to Cliff, who is Fifth, that musician, and she was in a cobalt blue dress, and she told her story, you know, about how her Jehovah's Witness husband used to beat her, and they didn't disfellowship him until he was smoking. And that was like the story that got this answer from Leah Remini, where she just said, unfrickin' believable, you know, like that's how crazy it was. But to me, I didn't even see that as, like, to me, that was a normal Tuesday. I was used to this beating stuff. Didn't think much about it. Wow. Today I realize it's absolute, you know, it's unacceptable behavior. But So she actually took me to my very first ex-Jehovah's Witness potluck at Randall Waters Church in Hermosa Beach. And at that time, I was in my I was in my 20s, and I remember sitting there, and it didn't even look like a church inside. It just seemed like an office building kind of thing. And I remember sitting there thinking to myself, all these thought-stopping cliches kept going off in my head. So everything he spoke about, I didn't even remember any of it. Now, that video of him is on YouTube, and since I've watched it, he was actually teaching on Robert J. Lifton's 8 criteria to totalism, which was something Robert J. Lifton had learned from interviewing prisoners of war from Korea, or prisoners of war that were, became prisoners of war, and how they brainwashed prisoners of war. But again, I didn't receive any of that because things kept going off in my head, like, oh my God, I'm in a church. Is there demons flying around in here? And
Linda,
yes?
do you know the name of that video that you mentioned? Because I love Randall Waters, and I've lost his phone number as well. Do you happen to know the name of that video that you referred to of him teaching, by any chance? Or
I don't, but I can probably put it out within this week on my own channel, because I downloaded it back a year or so ago.
Oh, good.
So I can probably put it up,
No
and
worries.
it's a 2-parter. So that very one got put on YouTube. I've recorded it, and I can bring it up this week. So, it was so when I look at it today, I'm like, oh, this was really good stuff. But again, in my head, I'm thinking, am I committing spiritual fornication? Does that make me a spiritual slut? I couldn't get out of my head and my thought-stopping cliches. And I remember looking at the food, thinking, could this food be poisoned? Like, this is how indoctrinated I still was. I liked being there, but I didn't trust what was there, from everything, phobia, indoctrination, and all that.
Linda, I need to ask Rick how much time we can have left. Rick, are you there, dear?
Oh, we're at the end.
I was just wanting to ask you.
Oh yeah, no, Mary,
Rick,
we've got plenty of time here. We can take more time here. I want to hear the rest of the story. Apostababe's doing really good.
I do too. Can you give me an idea?
Yeah. Well, let's go another half hour.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I just wanted to know. Thank you so much, my brother. Thank you, Linda. Please continue. I just wanted to make sure, because, okay. I'm just picturing you actually hearing Randall Waters talk, because he explained to me, we used to talk a lot, and he told me after he kind of made his way out of Bethel, he got hurt, he hurt his leg or something, and he had to go home to rest, and then he used that as an excuse, well, could I have like a leave because I need to take care of my parents? But he didn't want them to know that he was so done with Watchtower and Bethel. But and then he later became a minister, and he was really gung-ho, and he told me all about these little places where he would preach at. And I'm like, now you're saying you were there, that Cynthia, whom I also know, took you there. And I'm like all excited. So that's why I wanted to check in with Rick to see how much time we actually have. So yes, please continue. This is so fascinating.
Okay, and I'll try to pay more attention to the time. I'm just yakking away, but okay, so yeah, good. Another half hour. So Randall Waters was somebody back in the day that was, and then so he was my first Bethelite that I met. And I remember that day he had a stack of pictures of the pyramid that was at the grave of Charles Taze Russell. And it was a glossy picture, like photographs we used to go and get developed. And I got to take one home with me. I didn't know much about what it was about until later, but yeah. Um, and I was still struggling with high anxiety and my panic disorder. I did not want to um, take meds because I did not want to be hooked on drugs, right? So I went through all of my 20s with high anxiety, panic all the time, and, panic attacks and the whole nine. When I was 30, I read up a little bit about how um, medication for depression works. So antidepressants work. How they work is you take medication and it helps to balance the serotonin level in your brain. And what serotonin is a chemical in your brain that when you don't have enough, you feel anxious. But when you do have enough, you have a sense of well-being. Okay? Just like somebody who's diabetic and they take their medicine, it balances out their sugar levels in their body. An antidepressant balanced out my serotonin level in my brain. So, I learned about that. I started taking medication. I was terrified to, but, it really made a difference for me. And so I started taking medication at the age of 30. And I also started taking a stimulant, which was Ritalin. And today I take Adderall. So being that I had ADHD, it was very rare that I could read something and digest it. And so I wasn't much of a reader. I learned better by videos or other, learning by seeing or being told. So I ended up being able to not only take in what I was reading, I could digest it, I could see the characters and everything. So once I started on my medication, I remember reading the books called the Left Behind series. And I got all those books as they came out, and it was just really fascinating. I couldn't believe it. I could read not only like a chapter, but a whole book and have in my mind the characters and everything, the storyline and everything. So that was like major accomplishment. So, meds worked for me. So I have been med compliant ever since. And that's just something that, if people take medication, you're doing good self-care. If it's working for you, and if not, I get that too. So that, I believe, helped me with learning things and keeping the information stored in my head. And that was very helpful, So
Absolutely.
as time went by, I got to a place where I could visit a church and be okay. And that was nice. And over time, I ended up getting baptized as a Baptist. And I never got baptized as a Jehovah's Witness. I got baptized as a Baptist. Isn't that funny? But I went through a weekly Bible study with somebody there that, other people were at. It was very casual, and the little booklets that they used were super easy to understand, and it made sense, So I had no problem. And it gave me the sense of finally finding my authentic spiritual father. So becoming a Christian, within mainstream Christianity, after that 3 years with Dr. Walter Martin and checking everything out, I was then at a place where I had more acceptance of it. I'm on my medication. I'm able to read things and keep the context in mind. And that was the case for, a good 25, 30 years, And in my early 40s, I came out as a lesbian, which I always had known I was, but I always knew that Jehovah didn't approve of it. So it was something that I told myself, this is not allowed. You have to shelf it. You can't be a part of this. This is not going to be okay. And I remember knowing as a kid, and the way it looked when I was a kid was, I would ask my teacher, like I was in 3rd or 4th grade, could you wear your hair down for me tomorrow? I asked her this all the time. One day, she finally wore her hair down, And I knew she wore it down for me. And as she was writing on the chalkboard, she would flip her head back and her hair would flip back onto the other side of her shoulder. And it was like I was looking at Roger Rabbit's wife and thinking, you know, it wasn't sexual. It was just a puppy love kind of thing, you know. And I knew she wore her hair down for me. So that was quite a moment in my childhood. And in between the two marriages, there was an experience I got to have, and it was as though I had been lacking vitamins and minerals I had never had all my life, and that had finally happened. So that's what that was like for me as an adult, and experiencing that with a woman. So I remember afterwards just going, oh my God, I'm a lesbian, and just thinking to myself, oh hell no. Just like this cannot be happening. And the person I was with starts to reprimand me and said, no, you're not, and neither am I. We were just exploring, okay? And I'm like, okay, then I guess I'm bi. I guess I'm bisexual. Okay. And that's just the way I kept going, and, you know, shelved that and didn't touch it again. So went through my 30s, raising my kids in the Christian churches wherever we were living. And then in my early 40s, after a long time in a relationship I had with my second marriage, I ended up leaving him for a woman. Now, I don't recommend this, and I'm not claiming that that was a good thing to do, but that was what I knew how to do at the time. And it was the simplest way to get out of the marriage I was in at the time. And I was very unhappy, and I didn't know that what I was experiencing was a lot of neglect in that marriage and abuse, because I was so used to it. But I also can look back with my own hindsight today and see how my part was. And being raised a Jehovah's Witness, you're raised to play the part of receiving this abuse. You're raised to do the dance of putting yourself in the position of receiving abuse. You know, there's something called learned helplessness, where you don't think about how you can be empowered and get out of a certain situation. You pretty much just go, okay, I guess this is just going to have to be how it is, you know, and you don't think further than that. You know what I'm saying? So I allowed a circumstance to end my marriage rather than having the wherewithal or the strength to say, look, you and I are not working out and it's best for us to separate. I didn't have it in me to do that at that time. So that was at 41. And so he told me, he tried to tell me tried to manipulate me to stay with him, or else he threatened to tell the kids that I was a lesbian. So I decided, no, I think I'm going to beat him to it. So I told all my kids, and they actually supported me and were for me and didn't have no problem with this. Let me just back up. When I was involved in these different churches, you know, I got to be a youth group director. I got to lead worship, and all of those things came very natural to me. And I really enjoyed doing that. So if anybody is thinking about leaving the organization and maybe starting to visit a church, I really want to encourage you, though, at the beginning, not to have the mindset of how you can serve in a congregation, but let yourself be in a position to receive. Give yourself some time to receive and not get into service right away, because you deserve that, to receive and take things in. And that's just a suggestion of mine. So I ended up outing myself to my kids, and they were okay with it. So he didn't get to manipulate me that way and make me stay with him. So I left him, and that was back when I was 41. Today I'm 59, so it's a bit long for it to be a phase, if it was a phase. And I discovered a church that was open to the LGBTQ Christian community that I was a part of for a while as well. And there is a pretty large group of homosexual, queer, whatever you want to call them, alphabet soup, whatever, of that community that are Christian believing people. They're not really accepted in most churches, but there are churches that welcome them and welcome those that are straight. And what I would find is that parents would be with a son or a daughter that is a young adult, and what happened was they could no longer stay in the church that they were in. So the parents and them found a church where they would be accepted, and they would do worship and stuff. So that was a neat experience. I later found out that my pastor did not have any covering over her, meaning she did not answer to anybody. And I would call that, like, if you would call that denomination, she was raised by parents that were like Assembly of God. So there was, so it was considered full gospel, laying on of hands, speaking in tongues, all that. Later on, I got into another church that was like that as well. So, that was a trip, coming from a place of just being scared crapless in a church to actually being okay with it years later. And again, I raised my children to be, more of the more of a non-denominational kind of Christian, rather than you have to be this denomination or that. And I never gave them the whole kind of stuff that we got if we grew up in the organization, because when we grew up, there was no other choice. The only option was you will be a Jehovah's Witness. It's like you were a Jehovah's Witness in training, then you get baptized, and you go from there. But my kids did not have that kind of mindset. They knew that this is what I considered Christianity as something, and I taught it to them as, we go to church because we are Christians, not going to church makes us Christians. So you see the difference? So there's that. And so after a while, the more I was learning, I was realizing that, in history, there's something called Christology, where the history of Christ, that there had been times where, Jesus was not the only one that showed up and was looked at as Christ or the Messiah. There was many more that came before him, many more that came after him. And historical evidence of the Old Testament stories, the more I looked into things, I did not see evidence that confirmed what I had always believed the Bible, was. And over time, I saw the Bible as more of a book that, rather than being the, perfect word of God or all true, I saw it more as stories and examples of good behavior, and these are examples of bad behavior, not good direction and then bad direction, things like that. But eventually I came to a place where I really did not believe in the God of the Bible, nor the Bible as like the totally accurate word of God. And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, if I'm not a believer, do I have to believe in evolution? So I texted a couple of friends of mine that I knew were not believers anymore. And I said, do I have to believe in evolution? Because in my head, I hadn't figured out evolution. And both of them answered me back saying, no. And I'm like, okay. I actually came to a place where I was not a believer anymore. Never thought I would be at that point. I'll tell you what. Never, ever, ever thought I would be at that point. But since I have been at that point, meaning a non-believer in the God of the Bible and a non-believer in the Bible, I've had some more peace of mind than I ever have. And that's actually where I am today. If that, I'm not saying that can't change, because it could, depending on what evidence or that's brought to me. But that's really where I'm at today. I'm an unbeliever, and I'm totally at peace with that. Not only am I at peace with that, it's the most peace I've had in my whole life. When I do my show, I don't direct people to have any sort of a belief system and tell them which direction they should go into. But when I hear them leaning towards maybe one direction or another, I don't mind directing them to some that I might be familiar with, but I don't like to push my beliefs on anyone when I get to do the show, Healing After the Watchtower. I'm more about people tapping into who they are and to develop an identity, because we didn't get to have one in the organization. And I don't necessarily argue about doctrines like, when I first came out of the organization, and I spent, that was 7 or 8 years out. But when I got into, apologetics, which was, standing for the faith, to defend the faith of mainstream Christianity. And that was a place in my life that I needed to go through, and it was very helpful for me. But I don't tell people that they need to believe in that manner or not. And I know that some of us here on Six Screens are non-Trinitarian believers, or some are Trinitarian believers. It just doesn't matter to me. Either, if that's what you believe, what? There's this thing called Article 18 from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and it's called freedom of religion, and that belief is actually protected. And within that belief, what is also protected is you have the right to change your religion, or to not have one at all, which is what the organization has never brought to our attention. If you are a Jehovah's Witness and you're listening to this show, under the Article 18, freedom of religion gives you the right to change your religion or leave your religion and have no belief system at all. This is a human right that you are entitled to. So I just wanted to share that. On the show that I get to do called Healing After the Watchtower, I'm more about teaching what tactics and techniques are used by cultic groups that are cult-like. So it can be a religious group, it can be a political group, any kind of group that's a group can turn into a cult with the right kind of leader. It could be the PTA at your school, okay? If there's a leader in place that is a high on the scale of narcissism type of person, they turn that into a cult. You can be on a one-on-one cult with a therapist or a school teacher or a partner. If one of them has, a power position and they take advantage of that position of power and control, you might be in a cult. Jeff, there's that comedian guy, Jeff, I forget his name, Bonham or something, Jeff somebody or another. He does this entertainment thing where if this, and this happens, you might be a redneck, right? I've always wanted to come up with like this comedian sketch kind of thing that's like, if this, and this is happening, you might be in a cult. Like, I haven't quite mastered that yet. But if you find yourself in a situation where they tell you that they are either God or that they speak for God, that is cult 101, and that is a form of abuse of power, and it's intended to control you. And that's something to be leery for. That's a red flag. You want to leave that right away. So there it is.
That is so powerful. Before we run out of time, we have about 9 minutes or so. I just like Rick said, I want to hear the rest of your story. I am so fascinated by you, Linda. I am so curious. How did you come to find the 6 screens? Because I cannot imagine you not on the 6 screens. Everybody loved you. I mean, you're like such an integral part.
Oh, wow. Thank you. I can't remember how I found 6 screens. I must have found it when I discovered the XJW community. Like, I never knew we had one, right? So somebody told me when I had left the person that I left I left my husband to be with somebody. So I started a relationship with her that lasted about 3 years. That was an abusive relationship. Isn't it amazing, Anne Marie? I keep getting into these abusive relationships. I can't imagine why. No, I actually have since learned why. It's actually because of the way, it's because we were groomed for it. We were actually groomed. If you were, that's why I kept getting into abusive relationships, because it was like home. It was an ordinary Tuesday to me. So it must have been when I got involved in finding groups on Facebook and stuff. There were ex-Jehovah's Witnesses. I must have discovered it through that.
Wow. I'm so grateful that you did, Linda, because, you know, like I said, I don't listen to your show all that much because I just can't. I'm not able to stay up. But I listen, like when you call in to a show, and I listen to what you say and your comments. And I'm always blown away by how you word things. And I want to reiterate one thing that you said that I hope everybody really hears is when you come to that point where you're willing to walk into a Christian church, it doesn't matter. You know, I always hear Dolly Parton saying to Terrell Hannah, honey, God doesn't care what church you go to as long as you show up. It's not about labels. It's not about denominations. It's about spirituality and where you're at in your spiritual walk. And, you know, we are not here to be judged and labeled and critiqued by other humans who are as imperfect or more than you are. And when you said, you know, when you go to a church, you know, we always were pushed to serve, do more, serve, do more. So if you feel that need to serve, you know, like you said, just take a while. And I felt like saying, yeah, we need time, like you said, to receive, because we were always told to put out. And there was never anything to put back. Our energy, our love, any feeling of you're good enough or job well done. You know, we were like a car engine with no alternator. Keep going, keep going, keep going. And, you know, you're saying that says, you know, if you just sit there and let the Lord work with you, let Holy Spirit work with you, let the universe guide you, and let yourself receive, because you need time to heal. A healthy person can give and do in a healthy way. But if you're not healed, you're not healthy and you're not in balance. So you talked about balance. You talked about what worked for you to get yourself in balance. You talked about the peace that you have now because you work with yourself and you allow the universe to just support you in who you are. Personally, I've never understood this judgment about, I don't care. To me, there's heterosexual and non-heterosexual. It's like races or whatever. We're all different and we're all the same in that we're all unique. So who in the world has the right to judge somebody else? This is just my personal thing. I love your story. Anyway, please continue. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Well, let me just dovetail off of what you just said. Within Christianity, people go to church because they are Christians, and yes, some might come to a belief in Christ from attending a church, but it's very different than how it is when you're in a cult. When you're in a cult, it's what you do that makes you who you are. People that go to church as a Christian go to church because of who they are. So who they are makes them do what they do. In other words, if I liked bowling, I might join a bowling group because what do we all have in common? bowling. And it's neat to gather with people that enjoy bowling. I'm a karaoke junkie. I love going to karaoke places and singing. It's the same kind of thing. When you go to a church, a gathering place, it's because you're getting to gather with other Christians. And that's what you have in common. So it's not the church that you go to that makes you a Christian, but rather you go to the church because you are a Christian. Am I making sense? Let yourself be replenished for a while. Pay attention to the techniques and tactics that are used on you. If they're abusive, if they're spiritually abusive, or if they're spiritually edifying. And besides, you deserve to be replenished. So much has been taken out of us, So if you're thinking about joining a church or being a part of a church, you can look on the internet and see a few churches through YouTube or things like that before you even show up. There's different ways of doing that. And if you choose not to, that's okay too. But I'm not one of those situations. I'm not one of those cases that left the organization and decided to throw God to the wayside. That's not why I'm an unbeliever. I'm an unbeliever because I've spent a lot of time. I've done a lot of research. And this is just where I am today because I have read my Bible,
Yeah, that's amazing. If I could say one comment, because I was one of those that after coming out of Watchtower, when I first tried to quote unquote date, I ended up in very abusive relationships. But anyway, I remember reading somewhere, if you want to know if a person is good for you, and to me this applies to a religious organization or any organization or job or relationship, the thing is, they said, how do you feel? How does this relationship make you feel? And
Yes.
in Watchtower, I always was hanging my head. I didn't feel good enough. I was never going to be good enough. I was always, quote unquote, falling short. Same thing in an abusive relationship. So I thought that was a really good yardstick to measure, something by. How does it make you feel? And I know on Six Screens, I'm so happy. Every time it's Six Screens Saturday, Six Screens, I'm happy, happy, happy. I'm happy to listen to all of you. I was wondering, Linda, we have about a minute or so left. And actually, less than a minute. In case anybody wants to talk to you, can we open the lines and just ask somebody if they have a question real quick?
Oh, sure. I forgot about people calling in. Hi, callers. Anybody have questions?
Go ahead.
Hey, Linda.
Go ahead.
Hey, Linda.
Yes.
I was very lucky to have dinner with Linda in San Diego.
This is true.
Dinner, and Linda and I are completely different. Like she's from Venus, I'm from Mars, or the other way around.
Yeah.
We're completely different, but yet that's why we like each other, because we learn from each other, and I think that's what we've learned. That's what I got from her show, and also from the truth about the truth, is that we can be completely different people living in completely different planets, and yet we can still learn from each other. And that's why I appreciate my friendship with Linda. And that's why I love the Six Screens, and that's why I love being an apostate. And you really are my favorite apostate. So just
wow.
Out for the record.
Thank you, Gilbert. And I'm definitely voting for you for governing body. GG for GB. Woohoo!
Is there anyone else that would like to say something to Linda? We're pretty much out of time. Real quick question, comment. Linda gave a great testimony.
Yes. In fact, this is Rick Farron. I'd like to commend you, Linda. No, that's very good, Linda. I enjoy listening to that. You really, well, let me put it this way to you. We all have a story, and my goodness, you had one as well. And the thing that I appreciate about you, Linda, coming on the program, and, I listen at night because, I fall asleep a lot, but I listen in and I enjoy the way that you deal with people as well. But the thing I do like about you is you're non-combative. You don't get in battles with people. And even the Christians, sometimes even the Christians might prod you a little bit. And I'm a Christian man myself, but I appreciate the position you take. You don't become combative. You don't become argumentative. You're very gentle about that. You don't beat up on the people that have a different belief system than you do. So I'll commend you on that. I really, really do commend you for that. And I think it's marvelous that you can do the program. You hang in all night long and burn the midnight oil. And I'm looking on YouTube chat right now. And boy, a lot of people chat in there. They really do love you, Linda. They really do.
That's good to hear. And I appreciate that that's what you've gotten from the show when you've listened. And if anybody wants to leave questions underneath the show, I'll show up and, answer them because I know we're out of time. But I
Yes.
appreciate that you let me tell my story today, Rick. I appreciate that a lot. Matter of fact, you asked me to do this last night, and I almost said, "Is this a trick?"
Well, no. I know what it is we actually have two. Anne Marie does two programs, basically two different titles. One of them is ex-Jehovah's Witnesses share their Christian testimony. The one you're on is ex-Jehovah's Witnesses share their spiritual journey out of the water.
Okay.
So that's what it is. So we've had other people come on here too before that aren't Christians, but
That's what I didn't realize. Okay.
So because even I have to say this sincerely, that the only way Christians can be the Bible that many people never read. I mean, I've met good Christians, I've met bad Christians, and in my mind, a bad Christian is one that jumps all over you, doesn't let you get a word in edgewise, kind of like a Jehovah's Witness person. But there are Christians like that just will not even listen. But I like to listen to you, and I'm not going to judge you. I'm not the ultimate judge of humanity. But one thing I do know, you're a very humble person, Linda, and you have very, very good qualities, and we appreciate that. We really do.
I appreciate being able to be part of the Six Screens, and I thank you for that. And thank you for letting us have extra time so I could finish the story. I appreciate you very much, Rick.
Thank you, Linda. All right, Anne Marie, wrap it up. You got about a minute.
Well, thank you so much for chiming in. And Linda, I hope you know that we all echo what Rick said. I mean, you are just so beautiful. Of course, you're beautiful physically, but you have a beautiful heart and you're so balanced. And I love what Rick said. You're non-combative, but yet I've always noticed that you're always willing to listen to what somebody else has to say, even when they're angry, when they're ranting, when they're arguing. You're very supportive. You're very calm. You're very validating. Validating is something I wish everybody would learn to do. It's very important to validate someone. It doesn't mean that you agree. It doesn't mean that you're on their side. It doesn't mean that you feel the same way. It does mean I hear you.
Yes.
I understand what you're saying. And you always come across that way. You validate, and then you offer words of compassion. You offer words of support, and you make everyone feel comfortable. And that is one thing I notice about you that really makes you stand out as outstanding in my book. This is something I aspire to work on myself. But I just thank you for being you, and I thank you so much for coming on, Linda. And I just hope you keep taking care of yourself, because Six Screens cannot imagine the Six Screens without there being a Linda James Apostababe.
This is such a joy. Thank you. Thank you so much. Good night or good day.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Linda James. Okay, everyone, that was our favorite apostate, Linda James Apostababe. She always has the all-night show on Saturdays on the Six Screens. Today is Spiritual Sunday. The show is Ex-Jehovah's Witnesses Share Their Spiritual Journey. which Linda James did a fantastic job. We're going to go to Rick and JW World News now. Thank you so much, Rick.
Well, there you go, Anne-Marie. Very good program. Really appreciated it. Really appreciated Linda James coming on. It was really good. I never really heard her whole story, so I wanted to hear it. So now we got it in the archives. Well, anyways, this is a different day, Sunday, 6 Screens. We do get into the spiritual aspects, theology, scriptures, and what have you. But we have JW World News. That's coming up next. And that is going to give you the latest news that's going on behind the curtains of the Watchtower. And then at 4 o'clock, about a half hour from now, we have the Christian Court coming on. Now, that program is gaining a lot of traction. That's also crossing over into the Christian world. And what we do is we have 2 Bible scholars on that program. And there's questions that are asked. Now, these are not salvation-making points with God or anything. These are not salvation points. They're not going to keep you out of the kingdom. But many Christians have peculiar thoughts. Some do things one way, some do things the other. We're going to be talking about some of those things today on the Christian Court at 4 o'clock. And then if you want your Bible questions answered, well, the man that does that is Jay Hess. He's a former Jehovah's Witness, and he answers all your Bible questions at 5 o'clock today, right on the network. So let's end this program. We're going to go to JW World News coming up next. Thank you for coming in to our program today. We appreciate it.